Good, how are you?
Nice to meet you as well. Hi, Justin. Elizabeth. Hi, nice to meet you. Hello. Elizabeth. Nice to meet you. Good morning. Nice to meet you.
Right next to the phone.
I always forget you can see on these. You good? Back there on that. Good afternoon, guys. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Woodrow Weaver, and we are here on, and these are my colleagues.
Elizabeth Vermont and Chelsea Jones. Ashley also.
We're here on behalf of the University of North Texas. So it just so happened that right out of college, all four of us were hired as internal consultants at the Atlantic Western Railroad, or A&W as we'll refer to it later. So just to give you a brief background on A&W, they're a relatively large railroad, and they operate a main line that goes directly through Plainview. However, for purposes of this presentation, we're only going to be looking at the spur that breaks off in Plainview and terminates in Canyon City, which is about 843 miles. So, as it stands right now, A&W wholesales its entire intermodal service directly to an intermediary or a retailer. And it's that retailer's job to sell the intermodal service to the end customer. So at the moment, A&W does not have direct contact with their customer on their intermodal freight. So let's say, for instance, you wanted to ship something from North Plainview to South Canyon City. You would call up the intermediary, and that intermediary would arrange the drayage from the origin to the terminal in Plainview. And then A&W would be responsible for the line haul rate from the terminal in Plainview to their terminal in Canyon City. And once the load gets to the terminal in Canyon City, it is then that same intermediary's responsibility to arrange the drayage from the terminal to the destination. So now we'll go into our presentation. We decided to break our presentation up into 4 different areas: our introduction, decision process, our short-term solution, and then we'll conclude with our long-term solution. So when we first got the case, it was really important that we all understood what the actual problem was. And so A&W is concerned that at the moment their schedule and their line haul rates are not maximizing profit. They're also worried about if their intermediary is adding enough value to keep around, or if the intermediary should be eliminated altogether. Then we had to define a project scope as a group. And like I mentioned earlier, we're only going to be examining intermodal freight that goes between Plainview and Canyon City. We're not going to be looking at any intermodal freight that moves on A&W's main line in Plainview. And then finally we had to decide a project goal. And our project goal, well, this is how we'll know that we're successful. And once we set a departure schedule and line haul rates for both the head haul and the back haul that maximize profit, we will know we're successful on that route. And we're also going to make a decision on whether we should maintain the intermediary or if we should eliminate the intermediary altogether. So now looking at our current outlook. In this current outlook, I want to make sure is, after we got the model, there were a few errors in where the numbers pulled from, so we went ahead and we corrected that. And this is the new correction of the model, however, it's the original price structure. And so A&W currently charges $890 on their head haul market and $270 in their back haul market. And these numbers there's a huge discrepancy in the head haul and back haul market because there's 100,000 loads moving from Plainview to Canyon City. However, there's only 33,000 loads moving from Canyon City back to Plainview. So we make about $615 per load on the head haul. However, we actually lose money on the back haul of about $550. So with the original price structure, we have about 55,000 loads in the head haul market and about 15,000 loads in the back haul market, which calculates out to about $26 million in annual profit and about a 48.5% gross margin. Next, I'll briefly discuss train costs, because this is the cost that is directly incurred by A&W. So on the head haul portion, it costs us about $58,000 per train on the head haul route, and about $47,000 on the back haul route. And so, like I mentioned earlier, A&W sells all of its services directly to an intermediary. So the price that A&W sets is not the price that is quoted to the end customer. So each city was broken up into 9 different regions, which makes for about 81 different route combinations. So we took the average of all 81 different route combinations, and we calculated the average price for the intermodal route versus the trucking route. And so if a shipper decides to ship intermodal instead of going to the truck, they save about 30% in both markets. And so with the current price structure, we have 52% of the market share in the head haul market and about 47% in the back haul market. Next, we'll look at the current train schedule. Currently we ship 5 days a week, 1 train per week, and the schedule is in line with trucking at the moment. However, since we don't have service on Saturday and Sunday, we actually see a bottleneck on Monday of we have to receive both the trains from Thursday and Friday, and we have to depart 1 train. So we see an increase in labor requirements on Monday compared to the rest of the week. So this is another area of opportunity that we'll examine later. So the intermediary charge. Every single customer is charged $75 regardless of where their load is going. And then they're charged $1.50 per drayage mile, 11% fuel surcharge, and then the line haul price is set by A&W, of course, and then the intermediary maintains a 12% profit margin. So if you total all those costs together, that is the charge that's quoted directly to the end customer.
So now that we have our current outlook, we knew that we wanted to find a new line haul rates to maximize A&W's annual profit. So first I'm going to go over some assumptions we made, and then I'll detail our decision process. Our first assumption is there's no capacity constraint on the number of locomotives or double-stack cars. There's also no constraint on the space at the intermodal yard or on the volume that the intermediary can take. Our second constraint is freight has relatively inelastic demand, or our customers' demand won't change if there is a change in the price of goods moved. The third assumption we have is A&W is not operating under any contracts except for the contract with the retailer. Lastly, we assume that the data in the model given to us was mostly correct, and we focused mainly on correcting the calculations. So like Woodrow said, it was important for us to first identify the main goals for the case. We then gathered information on topics such as the domestic intermodal and trucking rates in the industry, also the truck driver shortage, and the use of intermediaries in the industry. Next, we wanted to make sure that the model given to us was valid, so we spent some time going over and correcting any calculations we could find. Next, we decided to use nonlinear programming with Excel solver to find our optimal solution for the line haul rates and eventually find our maximum profit for A&W. We did this by setting the objective as A&W's annual profits, maximizing them by changing the cells with the line haul rates in them, and we also added some service ability constraints. This gave us our short-term or immediate solution. Lastly, we wanted to analyze the value that the intermediary gave to us and also evaluate our new customer with the supply of vibranium. This overall led us to our long-term solution.
So we had about a week to decide on a short-term solution, and with that, we first decided to tackle the weekly train schedule. So as Woodrow stated, there's currently a bottleneck being created on Monday because we have 2 incoming trains and we're only sending 1 out. So what we decided to do was decrease the amount of trains departing to 3 trains per week on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And as you can see, that eliminated that bottleneck on Monday, and now we're able to use longer trains but at an overall shorter train cost. And as Elizabeth stated earlier, we use Excel solver nonlinear programming to get our optimal rates to get the maximum profit. So for the head haul, our optimal rate was about $771. Our train cost per load decreased to approximately $240, and our contribution per load decreased to about $530 on that head haul. Now on the back haul, our revenue per load decreased to $258. Our train cost per load increased to $895, and our contribution per load also increased to about $640. And we wanted to make sure that you all know that our goal isn't to maximize the profit for each route. Our goal is to maximize the overall profit and increase that bottom line. So we didn't too much concern ourselves with ensuring that every route was the cheapest. We wanted to make sure that overall we got the cheapest price that made that bottom line high. And with that goal, we were actually able to increase our annual profit $6.7 million to about $32.5 million annually, which is a 20% increase. And our gross margin increased 0.7% up to 49.2%. And with these lower line haul rates, our annual volume also increased. For that head haul, our volume increased about 25,000 loads to about 80,000 loads. And for that back haul, our volume increased about 4,000 loads to 19,000 loads. And that's with shipping with 156 trains per year at 3 trains per week. The lower line haul rates also decreased those intermediary rates that they charge the end customer. So for that head haul, they actually were able to decrease their rates about $142, which is a 13% additional savings, and that gave us about 25% more of the market share, getting a 78% market share on the head haul. For that back haul, we were able to decrease, the intermediary was able to decrease their prices $15, which is an additional 2% savings, and the market share increased 4% to 51%. So our immediate solution was to use Excel solver nonlinear programming to optimize our overall solution, and that gave us head haul rates of $771 and back haul rates of about $260.
Okay, so once we determine these optimal line haul rates, which is going to maximize our profit, we had a couple other things that we had to consider before we could really solidify our final solution. So the first thing that we had to go over was to really consider the value of our intermediary. And we first looked at this objectively. We did some research to kind of identify what the pros and cons are of staying with our retailer. And some of the benefits that we identified were that we wouldn't have to pay for the equipment that we currently don't own, the retailer owns, which is money in our pockets. And because of our relationship with the retailer and consequently their relationship with the customer, we generally have a really steady demand because we, of course, sell through wholesale, which carries over to the fact that we have significantly less risk with that middleman involved. And then lastly, we don't have to distract ourselves with some of the kind of lower ticket items that are, to be honest, kind of a hassle in the long run, when really we just want to focus on our core competencies, which is moving freight and increasing profit. But of course, there were a few disadvantages we had to consider. Of course, we don't have a direct customer relationship because we have that middleman, and we are risking potential for missed revenue if we didn't have that retailer involved, which we actually went into further. We did a monetary evaluation of the retailer. We created the retailer budget, which came out to about $14.7 million. We got this by calculating the door-to-door costs, including capacity, and then multiplied that times our annual loads. So this number at the top, $14.7 million, is kind of the budget we would get if we didn't have a retailer. However, this does not correlate directly with profit because we have so many costs that we would have to incur. Those costs are a wide range, but some of those things include that we'd have to hire new staff, new sales team, new HR department. We'd have to build our infrastructure from the ground up. We would, like I mentioned earlier, we'd have to pay for that equipment that we currently don't own. And of course, we have to cover the cost of our drainage partnership. So these numbers are not direct information that we could gather from the data realistically. Of course, we can make assumptions all day long. But instead, we decided to make a reliable template so that once those numbers were determined or could be calculated, they could just be placed into our model. And then you could determine profit margin without an intermediary by subtracting those costs from the overall budget. So with all that considered, our research, without knowing the exact profit margin, and following kind of current industry trends, a lot of major companies like BNSF, Union Pacific are leaning toward intermediaries. Currently, we would suggest that A&W go ahead and stay with the retailer. The second thing that we had to consider was adding the Vibranium customer to our route. As you can see from their request for bid, if we had 100% of the market share, we would add about 11,000 loads to our backhaul, which you can see at the top of our price quote here. We use the same model that they mentioned, the non-linear Excel solver for all of our other routes, except for this one, we just isolated strictly to the Vibranium customer, which resulted in a line haul rate of $219 for maximum profit. Consequently, this is actually 15% cheaper than the rates we're charging all the other customers, but realistically, that kind of makes sense since they have such a higher volume and they ship more frequently than our other customers do. So this rate actually results in 27% of the Vibranium market share, which consequently is a little over 3,000 loads added to our backhaul, which adds on to our profit actually an additional $400,000. And because we want to ship this through our retailer, you can see their additional revenue at the bottom here, which is almost $3 million. So with that considered, I would suggest that we would be more than happy to add the Vibranium route to our roster for that profit margin. And then finally, we had to consider how the trucking industry would react to our significantly lower line haul rates. It's realistic to kind of understand that short term, the trucking industry would likely lower their rates. They would want to stay competitive with us, and something we have to consider is long term. You can see at this chart, we actually got rate increase data from multiple sources like the Journal of Commerce and applied that data, or applied those rates to the data in our case to create this chart. So even though they might react short term, long term you can see that they just wouldn't be able to stay competitive with the rates that we propose. They are actually increasing almost twice as much as the intermodal industry is increasing, which is for, I'm sure, a lot of reasons, but mainly the two that are plaguing the trucking industry right now. Not a blank screen, is firstly truck driver shortage. I'm sure everyone in this room is more than familiar with truck driver shortage at this point, but also recently there's been a controversial introduction of ELDs, electronic logging devices, which could lower productivity in that industry. So with everything that we've provided you, everything we've gone over, this is the most optimal solution. Firstly, the line haul rates that will result in maximum profit for head haul is $771.17, back haul $258.04, which consequently give us an increase in market share of 25% and 4% for head haul and back haul respectively, which overall increases our profit margin by about $6.7 million. Through our research, we would suggest A&W go ahead and stay with the retailer so they can focus on their core competencies, which they can do confidently because even though the trucking industry may short term lower their prices, long term they won't be able to really keep up with the success we've created. And then finally, the optimal line haul charge for the Vibranium route is $219, which further increases our profit by over $400,000. So with those line haul charges for head haul, back haul, and Vibranium, as well as the trucking or the intermodal schedule that we created, we increased the profit of A&W by over $7.1 million. So, thank you.
So, two questions. First question is, when you looked at going from 5 trains a week to 3, and you did that calculation, was there a market share piece of that? Did you think it would change the attractiveness of the service? Was there an effect that you built in there on that?
Absolutely, because in the case it says that if the schedules are the same, it's every 5% savings you get a 2% savings back, and if the schedules are not the same, it takes 10% savings to the 2% savings to get back. So we definitely did calculate the difference in schedules in our calculation.
Right, and the second question is on the Vibranium piece.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to understand the process there. Are you just looking at the amount of empty capacity on the return and trying to fill that up, or were you looking at potentially increasing the size of the train? Just walk me through that thought process there, how you framed up that analysis.
So when we went through it, there's a sentence in the case that actually says that all trains that go to Plainview have to come back the exact same way. So we can't really like change how long the trains are going back. We have one, if they go forward, they're that length, that's saying that they're coming back. And so we looked at, there's a trailing ton miles in the case, and it's 5%, it's I think 0.05 cents per ton mile, or per mile, yeah, per ton mile. And so there comes to a point where if you feel all your loads coming back, it actually you start losing profit. So that ton mile charge right there is really how we went into. We didn't want to feel every single load, because at a point we start losing profit on the backhaul. It starts costing us more than not. So on the backhaul we tried to eliminate. We're never going to make money. However, we tried to lower how much we were losing per train.
Okay, thank you.
How would you commercially handle the conversation with the intermediaries that this customer is going to get a lower price on the train than the rest of the customers?
I think with that $3 million added revenue, they will be more than willing to give them a lower rate. And I also think that when you consider that they have 33% of the total loads going from 81 routes on that backhaul, they will be fine giving them a 15% lower rate.
And it's all about collaboration.
Right.
So they're a 3PL, so collaborating with our 3PL is really key. And so we would both, the intermediary and the A&W would collaborate to give this price directly to the Vibranium customer.
So you addressed that likely the trucks are going to reduce rates, but they can't sustain it over the long term. Right? But how are you going to sell that higher price to the 3PL or the Vibranium line? How are they going to sell that higher price to them in the short term when they've got a truck there that says, hey, here's a cheaper rate for you?
I think we're charging lower. We're charging lower than. I'm not sure.
I think he's saying that if the trucking industry lowers their rates immediately lower than ours, how would we keep the short-term customers? I don't know if you're about to say something like that.
Well, we also looked at some serviceability things that we could really benefit over trucking. It was more of like, what was it, safety?
Yeah, so
safety issues.
the Vibranium is a highly, it needs to be secure. And so if you go with trucking, it actually has a downtime of 10 hours out and about. And so if you go with rail, it's in a secure intermodal yard. Even though it's sitting there, it's secure. And so it's not out of, it only has about an hour of downtime out on an unsecure environment, where if you're going with truck, it sits for 10 hours, just out and about. So that we could sell that we have our security is a lot higher than.
Because it is an A class.
Yeah, have you assumed that, I don't think you assumed that you're going to take 100% of the Vibranium?
Right, we're only going to take 3,000.
So that risk factor, the mine's already going to have to address that risk factor.
That's true.
Something I know I want to add, we kind of discussed, we didn't present it here, but because we determined optimal, absolute max profit, there is still room for flexibility. We're still going to gain profit if we lower our rates a little bit long term. We're not at a point where we make max profit and then any point on either side we lose profit. We still make profit, so realistically, if necessary, I think it's completely feasible to say that we can also get into a little price war, so to speak, immediately.
Absolutely.
What is it that causes you to limit the amount of vibranium that you're taking?
That trailing ton mile. So the trailing ton mile, I think it's 5 cents for every trailing ton mile. And so if you think of like a parabola, if we fill up every single load that comes back, we actually, our cost, you would think going into it that you would want to fill every single railroad car coming back. However, we're charged a 5 cent trailing ton mile for every ton that goes back onto the train coming back. And so if this in our model, it showed that we don't want to fill every single car, because the trailing ton mile, it starts to cost us more if,
But your empties are all going back, so the container goes in, gets
Right.
unloaded, and now it's empty, and it's going back on the train and going back,
right,
yes?
right,
In your model.
right,
Okay, so I'm gonna take X number of tons of vibranium and stick it inside the container,
mhm,
and that's gonna generate X ton miles.
Right.
Tons times the mileage on the rail at 5 cents. That's a linear equation.
right,
And the revenue, as long as it's more than 5 cents per ton mile, is always gonna add a positive contribution. So box number in the 30%, in my mind, would add the same contribution that box 31% box. So I wasn't quite able to get to that parabolic
Something in
equation.
Something in your equation, because she's absolutely right, the contribution margin.
Well, I think one thing that is
linear.
gonna happen is, at some point,
You have to add.
you have to add the second locomotive.
Right.
And that's
That'll
gonna be
change
a step function up in your line haul
Yeah.
cost that then is gonna have to get amortized over additional units. So if the first locomotive can handle 49 units, let's just pick a number,
right,
unit number 50 is a loser.
Very expensive.
right.
Is a loser, but at some point,
It'll go back.
55 or 56, then you've kind of worked down that cost, and it makes sense to increase the size of the train, provided you can increase it enough to make the jump.
Well, and then you have to increase it in both directions.
And you have to increase it in both directions,
Right.
so, you know, I mean, so there's an
That
interplay here
absolutely
between
gets
your
it.
head haul and your back haul.
Right.
Okay.
And we did take that into every 18 double stack cars, we had to add an additional locomotive.
Okay.
So that's in this calculation too.
Okay.
So,
Thanks.
Well, I tell you, I like how you presented it. I like, you know, you covered each area, you went through it, we could understand it. I think your thought process, your logic is really, really good here. You don't know all the intricacies because you haven't been in the business, but you did pretty darn good.
When you took into consideration some of them, that the e-logs, driving capacity service, there's a lot of things going on.
Yeah. Very good job, guys.
Nice job, guys.
thank you very much.
Have you ever watched that show, Shark Tank?
Thank you, guys.